All right. Well, hey, everybody. I am Bryant Johnson and sitting here with Katie McCree and Melissa Rao, two other members of our team here at Ministry Architects. Um, why don't we start with a couple introductions as we get going? Katie, you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and where you are, and then maybe if we turned on your radio or iPod, what we would hear right up front.
I would go ahead with a question. It wouldn't have been an answer. Yeah, my name's Katie McCree. I'm a youth minister in Roswell, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And I'm in charge of all middle and high school stuff at my church at St. David's Episcopal. And I've been here for 11 years. So I feel like kind of what I excel at and what I really love to do is create adventure. So we do lots of really fun things with our kids and point them towards Christ in the process. So, and the music question, I really love pop music. So I listen to a lot of pop music. And I also like hip hop and R&B and kind of some like classic stuff too, like classic hip hop and R&B. So yeah, so I listen to a lot of stuff. No country music. That's the only thing you definitely won't find.
And there's proof that you can do the nay-nay. So just put that out there, right? Melissa, you want to tell us a little bit about where you are and maybe even your recent move?
Well, I'm pretty bitter right now because thank you for putting that song back in my head because I worked so hard to get it out of my head. So now I'm going to be doing the whip. Anyway, thanks for that. I'm Melissa Rao. I've been with Ministry Architect. It's going to be 4 years soon, so that's kind of fun and exciting. I've done children's and youth ministry for longer than I care to admit, and I think it's going on 2 decades soon, so long enough. But not long enough. I love it. And I've got 3 kids. My husband is an Episcopal priest, and we just, as a result of that, we moved to just outside of Philadelphia. So that's kind of fun and exciting. That happened about 2 months ago. So, okay.
Yeah. And what's on your iPod? What will we find right now?
Oh, you know what? An embarrassing concoction of just everything. My daughter loves Broadway tunes, so I've got some show tunes mixed with country, mixed with Macklemore and Mano. Like, I'm seriously, I'm a mutt when it comes to music. I love it all.
Too funny. Well, as I said earlier, I'm Bryant, and my wife and I, we currently live in Winston-Salem. We moved up here about 6 months ago from Charlotte, and I still commute back and forth to Harrison United Methodist Church in Charlotte the first half of the week, and here in Winston the second half of the week. And my iPod music selection is probably a little more lame. You will find more like podcasts. I actually was listening to NBC Nightly News this morning before we got together.
You're not supposed to say that out loud, right?
Yeah, it's a sign of also coming up on 2 decades in youth ministry, Melissa. Although I guess I could share that I was listening to the Beastie Boys maybe 2 days ago in my car, but old Beastie Boys, not new stuff. So there.
Well, I don't know about you. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to share my iPod, my playlist, because it's all over the map. Like, I just remembered that I've got Metallica on it too. So like, you talk about Beastie Boys, I've got Metallica. I mean, I can't use my iPhone or my, for a playlist. Like, somebody has speakers. Like, does anybody have, whatever? I'll never volunteer. Because you never know what you're going to get.
That's exactly right. It's interesting too, because I would have never thought of this years and years ago, but the impact that music has on our culture, and since we all have been in ministry for a while, it's really interesting to me to see folks like Justin Bieber, who recently has been talking about his faith and talking about his beliefs, and really seems to have the foundation of the Christian faith in his language and in his words. And then on the other side of that, people always question, like, okay, these people are stars, they're in the spotlight. Why would they do this publicly? Do they mean it? All that good stuff. As you all heard that, what did you begin to think? What did you reflect on?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I think to see someone like Justin Bieber, who was so shunned from society after he really, really messed up and hit rock bottom, um, I really think it's awesome for kids today to see that level of humility and to see someone clinging to faith, because he is. I think he's clinging to something in order to get him through his really rough times. And I kind of feel like that's kind of what we're supposed to do as Christians. And so I think it's great that he is taking those steps and he is talking about it so that kids might look up to that and understand that there's something for them to cling to.
Well, and I think like any kid that grows up in front of the public, it's kind of unfair because he's got to sort through things with everyone watching him, and he certainly made some bad decisions, but who hasn't? And so, like, what a blessing that our kids are going to get to see someone working out their faith despite the fact that he did make some bad decisions. But that doesn't mean that he still can't be a part of God's story, and he can't claim that for himself when it makes sense for him. So yeah, I think the whole thing fits together really well as a story for our kids to see how it really looks. It's not always pretty and clean.
It's sometimes less pretty and clean than the other, right? But but that's exactly I think what we find with Christ is that even when it is not pretty and not clean, that it can be made clean and
Right.
redeemed. How do you balance that out with folks? So, like when you're talking with teenagers and working with folks, how do you provide some balance between like it's really messy and ugly, and who would want their lives certainly under public scrutiny constantly? But how do you provide some balance between like the constant, what seems to be constant mistake after mistake, and here I am, new creation in Christ? How do you talk through that with folks, with young people?
I know personally, I think Christianity and our faith is a journey, and we are always transforming. So I feel like when I'm talking with youth, especially about messing up and being reconciled with Christ, that's something that we're always doing, that we've never really truly arrived. And so I think it welcomes real conversation and the fact that people are going to mess up, and that's totally okay.
Oh,
So I think it's an arsenal. Those are kind of the three pillars that I use when I talk to kids about messing up. And thank God for grace. Thank God for Jesus. Thank God for the cross, because that's really what, it's all about.
Well, it's interesting too. I think like anytime we see truth, anytime we see like love, anytime we see something like that, it's of God, regardless of where it's found, right? So here's a place that we see those things and we see it claimed, and at some level, regardless of the mistakes that are surrounding it, we've got to capture it and own it and call it out.
right.
It's funny too that in the middle of all that, of course, his life is on public display. The pictures that have come out of Justin and fully unclothed in public, and one of his statements was, I wish I could just be outside and be naked.
I know. Don't we all?
My first thought was like,
what?
Where's that place to start with? Like, since Eden, where has that place been?
Well, they exist. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't even know what to say to that. Katie, do you have I was kind of a what?
Off the rails, right?
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah, like that. He's Justin Bieber. He can't do that. He can't do that because he's like, like a human in the buff. So yeah, that was definitely some misunderstandings about expectations, I guess, of what kind of privacy anyone can have. But again, like goes to show that growing up with people watching you, you have no idea what normal is anyways.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think that statement was a very youthful one. I think it
Oh,
just goes to show that he hasn't arrived. He's still an adolescent if you consider what adolescence is, he hasn't hit that maturity level yet. So, and we often speak out of turn, right? When we're that young and aren't really thinking about what we're saying. So I'm sure it had a little bit of that, going on too.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And again, just like the public scrutiny, always in the camera, always, every word being recorded. I would hate that.
Oh my
um, but the thing that's kind of intrigues me about all of that too, though, is not only do we work with young people, but we also work with adults and volunteers. And they're probably engaging in these conversations as well. Do you guys have some like strategies that you use to equip folks for conversations like this?
Oh gosh. Strategies.
Tips?
That's a good one.
Thoughts?
Yeah. So I would always start off our meetings beforehand for 15 minutes with my leaders, about 15 minutes before students would come. So one of the strategies that I had was to ask volunteer leaders for our major youth gathering to come a half hour before we were supposed to start. And we would start, at that point, we would meet for about 10 to 15 minutes, kind of talking about some of the latest things that we've learned about kids, our kids, because all of them had major touch points throughout the week between each weekly gathering. So we would just talk about what's going on in the lives of our kids. And as a result of that conversation, there were sometimes questions that, as kind of the youth pastor, that I was able to address, and we could brainstorm and strategize together before the kids were there. So that was always helpful. And then we would also email. I would email at least once a month, kind of tips, tricks of the trade. Based on the latest reading that I had, I would share some nuggets of wisdom from that reading. And so that's kind of how I kept my leaders kind of savvy. Katie?
Yeah, we have less often meetings where we have all of our leaders together. So we do a lot of communication and education, even through email and group text and that sort of thing. So it is the same sort of thing that I feel like just engaging the volunteers in the sort of conversation that I would like for them to have with the youth is really important, because I think sometimes volunteers can have a hard time knowing, and any adult, myself included, knowing what's an appropriate conversation to have and maybe what is not an appropriate conversation to have. And so I think this is one of the ways that I can help them kind of gauge that. And so I will bring up topics like Justin Bieber or whatever through email and just say, hey, have you guys seen this? Give them a nugget, like what you're saying, Melissa, and say, hey, what do y'all feel about this? How do you feel about Justin Bieber? Are you talking about this with your own kids? Because of course, a lot of my volunteers have kids in the youth program. And so, what are they saying? And what of those things do you feel like you could use for a conversation with our kids at church?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. It's always important to help them, remind them where we want the conversation to land, at least as a part of the
Right.
ministry. Regardless of the thoughts and the ideas, where is it that we want to land? And based on our conversation, if we were doing this with our volunteers, we would say, we want you to land in a place of grace, and remind people no matter what the mistake is. And those conversations are always, I think, always going on, whether it's something in the community, something that's happened in your church, or maybe in the life of a family or two within the church itself. It's important to keep going on. Do you guys do some other, or have some other ideas about like ongoing training with volunteers and how you see that fitting into the ministry as a whole?
Well, shameless plug. It's called Training on the Go, and Youth Ministry Training on the Go, I think.
Who?
I know. Who? Right? Okay. Mark DeVries and Jeff Dunn Rankin wrote 24 lessons, if you will, for volunteers. And it's a great resource because it's accompanied by videos. And any youth leader, youth pastor, youth minister, whomever the program staff person is, can get a hold of this lesson and then attach the video into an email. And then in that email, within that email, there's follow-up questions that the staff person can engage then with the volunteer, and they can't answer all the questions unless they've watched a 3 to 4 minute video. And I'm saying shameless plug because I had the privilege of doing 8 of the videos with Mark and Jeff, and so it was a super fun project. But you know, as I was doing it, I constantly thought to myself, "Wow, this is a great resource." And so it's really good training, and I would highly recommend y'all check that out.
So I would second that, Melissa. We are using it at our church with our volunteers and doing about one a month. And the feedback from the questions as we send those out, the feedback is wonderful. It's helped me get to know them in a way that I just have not had the opportunity, even after almost 2 years. Just have not had the opportunity to get to know them. So it is a great resource. Thank you for being a part of it and helping to provide it. It's good. Katie, what do you guys do?
Well, I feel like a big part of what I do with my volunteers is just to rally them and make them feel like we are a team and that together we can do this, so that when they hit a bump in the road and they're confused or they don't understand or they're nervous, they feel comfortable to reach out not only to me but to each other and say we can do this together. And so there's just, for us, there's a lot of conversation about like, yeah, go team, rah rah rah. There's a lot of that, and then and I have also found it's really important for me to have conversations with them, not necessarily one-on-one, but in small groups. So I do lots of like going out for meals with my leaders in small groups, and just kind of talking about the things that are going on they're in charge of. And I'm learning a lot right now personally about how what I feel like is maybe common sense about how you work with teenagers is not necessarily common sense to a lot of people that are new to it. And so it's like, yeah, we're going to go out and talk about things that to me, it's like, I don't even know why we have to bring it up because it just seems like, of course, you know that. But if they're brand new to it, that those little pieces are so valuable. And so it's just an easy way for me to get to know them and have that time to rally and say, we're in this together. And then also answer some questions and direct them in the right way and all that sort of thing. So I really appreciate the face-to-face kind of small group time I have with them.
Yeah, the training piece, and certainly there are volunteers that are just fantastic from the get-go, and they have the resources. But I had a mission trip experience with a middle school kid that we were doing some hammering and building and that sort of stuff, and he grabbed the hammer by the neck and literally was like trying to just kind of punch the nail into the board on the railing that we were making. Was making no progress and getting frustrated and that sort of thing. And often think, for right or wrong, think about volunteer training in the same way. A lot of times we give people the tools to do the job that they need to do, but we haven't necessarily shown them how to use them and how to use them well. So it's an important piece.
There's some really cool things going on too, Brian. There's huge conferences every year. I know Group Publishing does, Simple Youth Ministry, YS does, National Youth Workers Convention, and they're all really great. Unfortunately, to bring a whole team of volunteers to them can be pretty costly. And so sometimes that is a detriment to a team to try and get everybody there. But there's also something that we're doing. When Ministry Architects does a lot of regional cohorts. Yeah. And so we partner with Methodist conferences and presbyteries and Episcopal dioceses, et cetera, where we can come in 4 times a year and do some really great kind of ground level training with different cohorts from different, teams from churches. And so that's been really successful and it's extremely affordable. And so I'm a huge fan of that as well.
Yeah. And usually the conferences help pay for those things.
Right.
So it becomes really cost effective for the church.
Exactly right.
That's good. So I wonder, do you guys have like a major mistake that you've made with volunteers at some point that you wouldn't mind sharing a story about? The one for me that comes to mind is this was probably 3 years into ministry, and we had made some plans actually with our volunteers to shift from a Sunday night kind of main event to a Wednesday night main event. Um, Great plans, wonderful ideas. Everything was fantastic. And the thing I left out as a leader was verifying whether or not the people who were involved in making the plans could be involved in the shift from Sunday to Wednesday night. And just never, seriously, never asked the question. And so the first week we came to Wednesday night, and all our kids showed up, and I was the only adult present. Which just was not, it did not work out. We shifted just because we were seeing more kids on Wednesday night, and had about 40-45 that first night show up, and I was alone and lost, and immediately like, the most important question, can you be here? I never once asked.
That's pretty good.
Uh, I have more than once had volunteers who were very enthusiastic, and they should be volunteering and they should be in youth ministry, but we maybe didn't initially put them in the spot that was right for them. But since they're so enthusiastic, instead of maybe rethinking where we put them, you just leave them there, and then after several months or maybe more than that, you realize, hey, there is a role for you, but that's probably not it. So like, let's shift and rethink things. So for me, I have to really look at who we have and go, yes, there's for sure a place for you. But let me make sure that you're plugged into the right spot, because there's lots of different ways to be helpful, but it's not a right fit for everyone in every spot. So that's my shortcomings.
I think one of my greatest mistakes I learned thankfully early on was because I had this preconceived notion that like older folks couldn't serve. And it wasn't until I was full-time youth ministry doing the job, and one of my volunteers happened to be like 80 years old, and I'm not even exaggerating that. And ironically, he was also one of the first people to have a Facebook profile, and he was just super, super savvy. Lived in like an assisted living community, but still was like awesome with technology, whatever. And he loved kids, and the kids loved him. And so, it was a mistake in the beginning because I almost feel like I didn't recruit anybody older than, 30, 40, and maybe, a young 50, like a cool, hip, empty nester. And that was, I think, a huge, huge mistake. And I think it's a mistake a lot of churches make, that they have preconceived notions about who should be serving, or what type of demographic is the ideal volunteer. But I feel like when we do that, we are kind of crippling the Holy Spirit in working through all of God's people. And so now that I know that, it's actually a lot easier recruiting volunteers, because now my volunteer pool has gotten much, much bigger.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe we can do this. We'll start to wrap up, but what would be your number one tip for somebody working in a church regarding volunteers? And in that, your number one tip that you could say like in one sentence.
Oh gosh, number one tip. You gotta ask. You gotta make the ask, and it's gotta be personal. That would be my number one tip. You can't do something from the pulpit. Blanket asks don't work.
Awesome.
Amen to that. Say to recruit from a place of excitement and not of desperation. But I'm really excited to invite you into what we're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would say recruit early. Don't wait. Recruit early. Start now. Always recruit. Always recruit. All right. So why don't we wrap this up? Katie, where could people find you or reach out to you?
It's easiest just to email me, and it's katie.mccree, MCREE, @ymarchitects.com.
Awesome. And Melissa?
Yay. Well, I'm Melissa at ministryarchitects.com, or Facebook, or Twitter. and it's always some mush up of my name. That's it. I know. I think Twitter, I'm Melissa Rao, so it's pretty easy. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm really a lot of places. So happy to engage in any way.
I'm everywhere.
Every
Well, I'm Bryant, Bryant at ministryarchitects.com, and the other place probably easiest is Facebook, which is facebook.com/Bryant Johnson.